wellnesscouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
You're listening to A Quirky Journey, the healthy family podcast with your hosts Jo Whitten and Fouad Kassab.
Welcome to A Quirky Journey. This is your host Fouad Kassab, and with me is Jo Whitten, my dear friend. How's it going, Jojo?
It's going good.
Yeah, so guys, we've got a really good podcast coming up as well today on a topic that we've never really covered before, and it's feet.
Feet.
The importance of feet. We have
They're pretty important.
They're very important. I never really liked my feet. I was born with flat feet, and I had all these orthotics and strange shoes that I had to wear, and I never really learned how to walk correctly. I'm still trying to learn now, and that causes a lot of structural issues in my body, and they lead to pain as well. And even though things do get better slowly over time for me, it's a process that is probably better off not initiated in the young ones at all. So we have a Paul Thompson, who's a podiatrist from barefootmovement.com.au, and the barefootmovement.com.au. And Paul is a wonderful human being who explains really, really clearly and really simply the importance of not having shoes take over your lives, and also how to deal with children as they grow up, and what kind of shoes they should be wearing, and whether they should be wearing them or not, and just give some really good practical tips around that, and emphasize the importance of the right footwear, and anything that is gonna change the way that the body is structured is going to lead to bad habits in the body that will overcompensate in terms of the mechanisms that the body needs to implement to stay balanced and upright and moving forward. These things can be avoided with the correct footwear, so that your child or yourself, you don't need to go down the orthotics path, and you can avoid injuries, and you can decrease pain as well throughout your day-to-day activities. So this is a really good podcast on this topic, and we think you're going to love it. Jo, do you have anything to add there?
No, I just thought it was really fascinating because I'd never really thought about podiatry, and I'd never had to.
Because
I suppose because I grew up wearing no shoes, so my feet were good.
Yeah.
And my kids, still hardly ever wear shoes. At 20, 18, 16 and 14. No, they wear them when they go to work.
Yes.
But other than that, they're half the time.
Because they're snakes.
Yes, they're snakes, and they have to wear steel cap boots at work. So,
all right.
Never mind. But yeah, it was really interesting to me. So I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys all think of this podcast and how it helps them.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, we'll head on to the show, and thank you so much for joining, and we will chat to you soon. Paul Thompson, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Paul, I've been to a podiatrist many times in my life to address issues with my flat feet. I remember one of my earliest memories is going to a podiatrist who put me in really funny shoes that I couldn't bear wearing at the age of 7, and that kind of scarred me for life. But I'd love to dig into this world of podiatry, which we haven't covered before on the podcast, to actually understand the scope of the work of a podiatrist. What kind of problems do people come to you with, and what have you been seeing over the past few years and as the most common issues that people come in with?
Well, first, I apologise that you had that experience with podiatry. Sounds horrible. Look, podiatrists obviously deal with the feet, and clinically what we generally will see people for is there's kind of two parts of podiatry. There's what we call general treatment podiatry, which is all the nail, skin type of conditions. But then the other side is more what people look at as sports podiatry or biomechanics, which is based around, sounds like what you kind of had seen someone for, which is more movement-related issues. So that'll tend to be symptoms such as heel pain, Achilles pain, knee pain, back pain, big toe pain, bunions, all of the above. It's basically the hip down that we tend to look at as like traditional podiatrists.
So the area of focus for you, has it been around the more biomechanic stuff, or is it all of that you mentioned?
Yeah, so look, for me, and I'll jump into a little bit of my story, it's kind of like I trained as a traditional podiatrist, went through uni, studied podiatry, and you learn both. So you finish knowing how to do all facets of podiatry. But for me, through uni, the biomechanics side of things which then tends to lead to treatment being like the stiff, funny shoes and the orthotics and that type of thing. It didn't make sense to me. Sorry, it made sense to me. It didn't make sense to me, if you know what I mean. So I got it. I got why they were doing that type of treatment, but I don't know. There was something in my brain just saying, I get it, but I don't like it. So when I finished, I did do traditional biomechanics for a while, just in general practice, but I tended to focus more on the general treatment because I was helping people. I could see I was making a change in people's lives with skin and nail conditions. But the more, I guess I kept looking into the biomechanics side of things and why I didn't like doing that type of podiatry, it led me down a path of looking more research, more courses, and basically led me to a point that I realized orthotics were a bit of a tool and a bit of a way of helping people through a bind in some cases, but for the most part, there was a bigger picture that needed to be resolved that wasn't necessarily being resolved by conventional treatment methods. I guess like you guys talk about with food, right? Like, there's a big hidden truth around what food can actually do, and movement's the same thing. We get led down this path of needing more support, needing all these tools and things to make us move better, when in fact it's just fueling the body in a better way that then corrects all the bad movement patterns naturally. So I do focus a lot more on the biomechanics side of things now, but in a very different way to what I guess was trained to do.
So in the conventional training, when they talk about things like orthotics and arch support and these things that sort of manipulate the shape of the feet as they come in contact with the ground, what's the idea behind that? What was the conventional thinking that led us to go down this path?
Look, it's complicated. Like, it's hard to obviously over a podcast explain all the different reasons we sometimes need orthotics, but the basic underlying principle is that an unstable foot, so a foot that rolls in too much or flattens out, causes problems further upstream, which it does. So the idea is that you put something in the shoe to hold the arch up and support the foot more, so there's less of that flattening out of the foot, and therefore like less wear and tear on knees, hips, ankles, all of the above. But it doesn't resolve like the underlying issue. It's like putting a Band-Aid on something or taking a Panadol for something. Like, the underlying issue is still there. And don't get me wrong, like orthotics and supportive shoes are still needed for some people. Like, I still prescribe orthotics, where needed. But my view on it now is that it's just so overprescribed and over-relied upon. And as a society, that's what people will go to even before. They'll come into me, knowing nothing about me, just knowing them a podiatrist, and will come in with their problem, and they've Googled it, whatever the issue is, and they've tried their orthotics from the chemist, and that didn't work. So what can you do for me? And we're just in this mentality of sore foot, we need to put more support in there, whether it's through a shoe or an orthotic. That's kind of the mentality we're in at the moment, and that's what I'm out to change. The view on how we look at feet and how our foot actually can support itself, and not only support itself, but support a fully functioning body. Our feet are pretty amazing things.
So how did you get into being interested in all this? I suppose you had trouble with your feet growing up, or?
Yeah, look, as a kid, I did wear orthotics, and I always joke to my patients that that's why I got into podiatry, so I could make myself cheap orthotics, because they can be quite expensive. And for a few years, I did do that. Perks of the job, but yeah, look, for me, I've had just different injuries over the years, some of which were biomechanical, so the way I move with bad posture and things like that. I'm sure there's definitely a food element to it as well, the more I'm looking into things. But for me, it was just around after the birth of my son is when I really got serious about it. I remember we're over in Hawaii, and I obviously didn't have my orthotics with me. And I'd been looking into it, different approaches to healing the body through, movement and sort of posture correction. But yeah, I just vividly remember walking along one of the beaches and, having some niggling pains, and I was really drawn to them mentally, just focusing on just how I didn't want to be an old dad. I wanted to, be able to run and bend and play and not have aches and pains as an excuse. And orthotics hadn't done that for me. In fact, having to walk on the beach holding my son, I was in just as much pain as if not more. Anyway, so from that moment, I was really serious about it, and it became a mission of mine to fix myself, which I'm still on the journey of doing, but also to not mess my kid up. I sort of thought, why am I like this? Obviously, there's injuries, but biomechanically, we can't be born. The orthotic industry is huge. It's a $1 billion industry. The footwear industry is another $1 billion industry. And I remember just thinking, surely we haven't evolved to have feet and sort of bodies that are this bad that we need shoes and supports for the majority of the population to get around. So yeah, and I just really got stuck into learning as much as I could, to now, I've realized just what, shoes and sitting and foods, the effect that they do have on our body and the way we move. So, I want to educate as many parents as I can on just how we can create better movement patterns for kids so they grow up and develop in a way that is more natural and that the body learns to support itself. And then for adults, obviously, it's trying to get back to that natural way of moving, to stop relying on all the artificial supports and to start actually using our body, the way it was designed to be moved.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. So what I'm really interested in knowing is you've come to that conclusion is in a way sort of taking us back more in line with our nature so that our bodies can develop in a way that is strong and well aligned. That's what I'm hearing you say, but I'd love to understand a little bit more detail about that. So maybe we'll start with the perspective of someone who's born looking like they're healthy, like their feet are fine, that there's no problem with that. What's the general way for someone like that to progress and to continue to grow so that their feet and their posture are actually not going to be damaged by their lifestyle? What's a good way to go from there?
So look, there's three, I'm sure there's more, but there's three sort of key factors I talk to parents about when they come in, just for to ask basically what you just asked: how do I keep, how are my kids' feet and how do I keep them healthy? there's three big things we need to be aware of as parents and even just as adults for our own feet. But look, I can't remember the guy's name. There was a pediatrician, a leading pediatrician in the States, he'd once written that in his clinic anyway, in his practice, he believed that 99% of babies born had perfectly normal feet. So, there's obviously some kids that are born with structural problems, different conditions that will affect their feet, and that's that needs to be addressed and treated differently. But for the most part, a healthy foot, it needs to move. It needs to adapt to the ground. It needs the nerves. There's around 200,000 nerve endings in the feet that need to be stimulated to create the right muscles to fire at the right time. And it just feeds the brain so much information. So the 3D things are footwear. Footwear is a huge one that it drives me nuts. I could talk about it all day. Sitting is another big one. We sit too much. And food, which you guys would be all over anyway. And from a podiatry point of view with food, a lot of those inflammatory foods and sugary foods, it changes the way our body moves as it creates inflammation in the joints and creates stickiness in the tendons, which creates compensation patterns. So if you've got a slightly inflamed joint, it may not even be sore, but if it's inflamed, it's going to change the way that joint moves through its full range of motion. So your body will see that as trauma and want to protect it. So you can then change the way you walk. Like if you bang your big toe, right, and it's sore, you might limp for a little while, pain goes away, it gets better, it's fine. You go back to walking normally. Unless you've walked with that bad toe for years on end, then that pattern can become a habit and you'll constantly walk with that limp until you actually correct it because your brain has developed that way of walking for so long. And inflamed joints can be a similar thing, I believe, that if, through foods or whatever it is that's inflaming your body, if you're having to compensate even just slightly, it throws the body out of its natural alignment, natural state of movement, that you may protect a certain area a little bit more subconsciously, and it definitely changes the way we move. The sitting one, basically kids and adults, we all sit too much, which creates an imbalance in muscles, turns the glutes, not so much off, but it inhibits the way they move and the way they function. And the glutes are a major part of stabilizing our body when we walk and when we balance. But the big one that I want to push today is the footwear. So basically, even as a traditional podiatrist, we're told kids are in soft-soled shoes until around the age of 2. So the first couple of years when they first start walking, it's a soft-soled shoe. But then from around 2, everything changes and we are guided more towards from a podiatry point of view, but also just in shoe stores all around Australia, but probably around the world as well. We then start seeing stiff-soled shoes, more support in the shoes. And by the time the kids are at school, we all know the typical type of school shoe. They become really quite rigid and supportive. But what's actually changed between, an 18-month-old and a 2-year-old with their foot? Like, it's still growing and developing. So if we're trying to keep the soft soles on the shoes until around 2 while they're growing and developing, why at 2? This was sort of my dilemma, especially with my son, trying to find, shoes and things that fit and move naturally. They're really hard to find because everyone wants to start supporting and selling you more features to protect your child's feet. But the arch of the foot doesn't develop until around the age of 6. And the way that develops is like any other muscle. You have to use it and abuse it to really get it strong and resilient. But if we're locking it up in a shoe, that doesn't happen. It doesn't allow the muscles in the arch to fire as well. It just changes everything. So the features in the shoes, I know you were going to ask this, are basically the heel. So the big one that just drives me nuts is the heel in a shoe. And you look at most kids' shoes, like a traditional jogger or school shoe, they'll have at least a centimetre heel height compared to the front of the shoe. Which means we're tilting, if you were just to stand the child up dead straight without compensating anywhere, that centimetre heel in a small child with a small foot tilts them forward. I'm not sure how many degrees, but it's going to tilt their centre of gravity forward. So you would then have to end up compensating by shortening the Achilles and the calves, compensating the hips to tilt slightly so that you can stay upright. And therefore, like neck and shoulders will also become affected. So that little heel that we start at around the age of 2 or worst case 5 when we go to school, we're in those shoes for, 7-8 hours a day. Some children, even longer if they play sport after school, that have this little heel. So they're never developing a natural movement pattern. They're always in a shortened position, compensating because of the forward tilt with that little heel. And the arch is always on or slightly tightened because the big toe is going to be slightly raised, which is a natural function in the foot that causes the foot to lock as a way of propelling. But if the big toe never goes completely flat, you never unlock the foot fully, which means the foot never functions like a naturally functioning foot. Have I lost you yet?
No, that's good. I'm glad that I never wore shoes until I was about grade 5.
Yeah, right. Perfect.
Fun off Queensland life.
So everyone needs to move there.
Yeah, definitely. We didn't have to wear them to school.
That's great.
I see a lot of kids that have their feet like really turned out, like their toes are really, really far out instead of sort of being a little bit, well, not parallel, but kind of the toes pointing forward, the big toes pointing forward. What's the shape of a healthy foot alignment? What should it look like?
It should look like a hand. So it should have spaces between each of the toes. So the normal foot that we see, and when I say normal, I'm not talking about natural. I'm talking about, what everyone's foot looks like. Yeah. It's all squished together because of shoes. And it's become normal because the majority of people wear shoes, right, which pushes the toes together, which also turns a lot of the muscles off in the foot because they just don't need to activate anymore. So you actually want to see a space between, as many toes as you can. A nice wide foot's a nice healthy foot.
Definitely not today's beauty standard for.
No. I know. I've met people from New Guinea that will, because up here in Far North Queensland, it's very close to us, and we see their feet are more like you're saying, with the space in between the toes.
That's great.
They're always without shoes.
And in terms of like the alignment of the feet to each other, like if one was to assess their own feet, whether they're developing correctly or have developed correctly or not, what should we see? Like should the feet be parallel to each other or slightly apart, or how can you maybe describe the shape of how they align next to each other?
Yeah, so ideally in an adult's foot, it should be more parallel, maybe about 10 degrees maximum, pointing outwards.
Okay.
But the big sort of duck-footed Australian stance that we see, that's because of thongs and bad shoes and sitting too much. The whole posture is just you're hanging off your joints. Basically, you're not using the muscles to support your body. But in children, it's slightly different. They do go through different development patterns where the feet they'll change, or the hip will be, as the hip develops, once the child's standing, it'll go from more of that big, wide, duck-footed stance where the child's trying to learn balance, and they'll stand with that wider duck-footed stance naturally, and that's fine. That's normal. Then they might even come into more of a pigeon-toed stance for a little bit, and then back out to sort of straight or slightly duck-footed. But yeah, children there is some normal variations in children while they're developing. But sort of by the time they're 10, like definitely by 10, you want to be seeing the children sort of standing with their feet straighter, good posture, glutes on, tummies engaged, and the feet are engaged. None of this hanging off one hip that we see on the teenagers.
Yeah.
I experienced a lot of trouble with my posture, and I'm kind of still recovering from this whole thing. My peak weight was 128 kilos, and at that point, my big toes had frozen, like they actually stopped moving up or down.
Yeah.
And since then, I've lost 30 kilos, and I think it must have been around 2012 or something that, as I had adopted the paleo diet, I was really thinking a lot about ancestral movement patterns and what I should do to be able to heal my body. And I was reassessing all these things in my life that I was doing conventionally and whether they actually fit in line with hunter-gatherer patterns of living. And I decided to go to like a more barefoot approach. The Vibram five fingers, and the complete shock and horror of my friends and family, and because they look like a glove on your feet, really. And also found the Merrill, Merrill were making these.
The trail glove, was it?
I'm not sure if it's not the trail glove. It wasn't going around my toes. It was just a normal shoe with zero heel.
Zero drop. Yeah.
And the Vibram. So I think Vibram was making their just the bottoms of the soles of those shoes. They were actually doing those, and that was a bit more wearable in public. It didn't look too different to but I also had like a career as a software engineer. I was working as an IT manager and, working in banks and stuff. So I couldn't actually wear these things there. I struggled a lot finding all this footwear that would actually suit a more kind of professional environment. But the funny thing is I remember I was walking around, I think the house. I was cleaning the car or something like that, and there was water under my feet, and my feet were wet, and I was walking around on the concrete, and I couldn't even recognize my own footprints after a year or so of being barefoot, because I used to leave like a whole footprint, like I didn't actually have.
Yeah, it was so flat.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I looked down and I could see that only the left side of the left foot was showing, and like it just cool. I was like, who's this guy who's from
That's after 1 year.
Yeah. And then over the years a lot of the movement has come back to my toes, so my left toe moves up and down completely freely now. The big toe on the right foot still struggles a little bit, but probably has increased movement like 60% or 70%.
That's right.
But I still have like I don't know if you call it a bunion, but like a really, it's not as severe as bunions that I've seen, but like a growth in that bone. It's kind of like it's too big, and it experiences inflammation and pain, especially if I hit that part of my foot with something. It's very painful. But the improvement was, really remarkable for me to see the changes in the architecture of my foot, and how by taking the support away that I've always given it, because I used to wear orthotics and supportive shoes and all that kind of stuff, because I just wasn't stable on my feet. By taking that away, the arch developed itself for the first time in my life, and was just incredibly amazing to me to see. Actually, that even that part of me that I lived my whole life thinking was some kind of a birth defect, that I had flat feet, was beginning to correct itself. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about this, the process of recovery, and what people would actually see when they move to the advice that you give them. Like, what kind of changes have you seen?
So yeah, similar to what you just said, like I think the things that people will see will definitely be the actual foot change shape. But that's kind of, so for some people that's enough, and creating just a stronger foot, by getting barefoot and using your feet, can be a fantastic change and change the way your body moves. But just to touch on what you were just saying, what I normally recommend to people is, like, the shoe is normally the last thing that I'll change in an adult. Mainly because I've just seen too many people try and transition to barefoot, or sorry, not transition. They'll just take the shoe away and like start trying to, walk barefoot more, but then end up with more aches and pains. So you need to, not everyone, like some people, like I said, will be fine just to ditch the shoes, but for a lot of people, especially in adults, there can be years and years of poor movement patterns, joint restrictions, weak muscles, even like a disconnect between your motor controls, or the way you actually move and control your foot and the rest of your body. So some exercises are normally really advisable to start the process, and they can be as simple as working on some hip strength. So normally at the moment I have some free exercises on my website anyway, just to help people start to bridge that gap. And they're basically things like, some hip bridges to get the hips and glutes a little bit stronger and firing, some specific foot exercises. I like to use one called the short foot, which is basically contracting and relaxing the arch of your foot and starting to engage those muscles again before ditching the shoes. And then once you feel you're getting some strength and some control back in the foot and in the hips, then start to wean out of the shoes, especially with the heel in the shoe. But then for people that really are struggling and need more help, then obviously seek someone that can help you transition better and actually work on your movement patterns and really assess what the restriction is, so that you can get there safely and actually learn to move properly and not just develop a new bad habit that might catch up with you later on. So
there are dangers then, obviously, in that kind of quick transition. So maybe
100%. That's why Vibram Five Fingers, they got sued.
Right. Okay.
So what happened years ago? There was a bit of a barefoot craze, right? Like everyone thought, barefoot's the next best thing, and Vibram was selling lots of shoes. They were the 5-finger glove-looking shoes. But it was partly their advertising that brought them undone. They were telling people the shoes were going to, solve all these problems and help get people better, basically, when in actual fact the shoes won't necessarily do that. So people were going from, running their 10, 20, 30 Ks a day or whatever they were doing, and then overnight switched to this new fantastic shoe that had no support and it was going to strengthen your body. But what happened is they didn't transition and were still running the same Ks, might have had the same bad movement patterns, and people were getting really hurt. People were getting all these different injuries and some quite severe, and there was a class action against Vibram some years ago, and they actually got sued for it. But it's not the shoe. So they're fantastic shoes still. It's just that we need to be aware that it's not just the shoe that's going to fix us. It's working on moving better. So, and like nourishing healthy movement. So it's like just saying I'm going on a diet. Like, cool, you can go on a diet and you might lose some weight, but if you're still eating lots of inflammatory foods, there's still going to be underlying issues that you haven't dealt with, right? So movement's the same. You can ditch, the shoes and feel like you're going to become, better at being barefoot. But if you don't address some of the underlying bad movement patterns or stiff joints or strengthen some of the really big stabilizing muscles that are there to support us, then you still might not be moving as naturally or as healthily as you could be. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For me, because I kind of still wasn't at that point where I could do any vigorous exercise, I think that in itself spared me from having problems, trying to run too much barefoot or anything. Like, so it was more beginning to walk barefoot. And then whenever I felt like, hey, my feet got too tired from that, I'd go back to my shoes, which had already changed shape. Like, I wouldn't go into wearing like the super supportive shoes. I'd start wearing shoes that were a bit less supportive, and it was sort of like a transition out of it.
Yeah, great.
But I remember reading this book, Born to Run, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And that one sort of really glorified the barefoot movement. And it was one of, maybe the book that a lot of people that I know who do barefoot read and got inspired by. And he was talking about the Tarahumara tribe, who, are the best runners in the world, and they run barefoot. And it kind of, it's so convincing when you see this kind of hunter-gatherer evidence that, hey, this is how we're designed to be and how our bodies should be working. But you're right, like, our bodies aren't actually, the bodies of a hunter-gatherer.
Yeah.
No, far from it.
It was just a really good transition for me. But I've heard some horror stories about people like really injuring their feet or the tendons getting super inflamed because they were too short because of the heels, and then they transitioned to running, and the heel, the tendon just wasn't long enough to cope with that kind of pressure from running barefoot. So it's a big kind of word of warning, and this is why I love, like, seeing, like, with all these things now, we're seeing really expert advice come around this topic, which before was just like people intuitively knew that it was good, but they never had some serious guidelines around it. So can you talk maybe a little bit about that program that you have to teach people, and so the concepts that you introduce them to, and maybe where they find this program as well? We'll put all these details in the show notes, but I'd love to know a bit about that program and how you approach this transition for people.
Yeah, so look, I do run workshops occasionally. They're kind of few and far between at the moment. But I do, for people who want to do it themselves, I'll run like a one-day workshop and just go through all the basics and all sort of the basic exercises that you need to do to transition, not only safely, but then to maintain really healthy movement patterns. But otherwise, I work with people one-on-one, either in person or over Skype. Same thing. We just work through like the restrictions that are in the body, especially through movement patterns, and then go through drills and exercises to start rebuilding healthy movement patterns. So the program like my methodology that I use, I call it the SLACK methodology, so SLACK, and basically it stands for strengthen, lengthen, align, control, and then keep. And they're the things we're looking at to create really healthy movement patterns. So we need good strength in all the stabilizing muscles in our body. Then we need length through joints and through tendons and through muscles. We need to be able to access our full range of motion. We then need to learn and become aware about actually how to align our body to how to stand properly. You know, some of the concepts around walking, what you should be maybe focusing on when you are trying to, you know, think about walking a bit differently. There is right and wrong ways to stand and walk, and ways you can actually activate muscles a lot more efficiently when moving. Then we go through how to control movement, and that's the big one. So a lot of stuff you'll read online, you know, there's lots of great stuff out there about transitioning to barefoot or just healthy movement. And a lot of it's more around mobility. So, you know, creating range of motion and stretching and foam rolling and all these things, or strength programs. But there's not a lot of people out there really teaching people how to control movement. And that's the big one. That's where you take the range of motion, take the strength in the muscles, and bring them together in a way that everything works at the right time and in the right order, in the right place. You know, you're not compensating. And then you need to learn to keep that up. So you have to maintain movement, especially this day and age, where we do, sit a lot. You know, you might have to wear shoes for work, or, you know, the world at the moment's out to get us. It's trying to not make us eat as well as we could or not move as well as we could. And that's cool, as long as you're aware of that and can then bring things into each and every day that you can, create that maintenance phase. Then you start to see long-lasting results, and a lot of, you know, aches and pains start to go away, especially in movement, and a big reduction in injury as well as improved performance. So you'll just move more efficiently. That's why that, you know, Taro Mara tribe you're talking about can run these ultra marathons completely barefoot, and they do it for fun. Like it's not hard for them, because they just move so efficiently and so naturally that it's not hard work. They are actually born to run.
It's possible then for us to like train ourselves, because it seems like there needs to be a conscious effort in being really tuned into your movement patterns early on as you transition. To do it
properly, it's like taking on a whole foods diet, right? Like, to do movement properly, you need to be committed. And I see it in the clinic all the time where people will, I'll do it. And you start working with them, and, you know, if they're not doing the exercises, they're not, it's like trying to eat paleo or whatever. Like, you can pretend to eat paleo, but you're still sneaking in some sugary treats. You're not going to get the same results, right? So you need to be committed to actually changing the way you move and wanting to change the way you move for it to work. Otherwise, you're probably just better off in the orthotics than...
Does it transition out of that kind of conscious mind state to becoming then a subconscious movement pattern, like a healthy one?
Oh, definitely. Right. It's just the early days that if you're used to moving a certain way, like even breathing. So a big part of what I teach people now, and it's kind of weird because there's nowhere near the feet, but learning to breathe properly is one of the first things I go through with people, because you need to be able to stabilize your midsection and breathe diaphragmatically into your gut. So it's funny that you guys always talk about gut health, and even from a movement point of view, I'm always talking to people about the gut health as well. Like, it all stems from the gut, but for me it's more about stabilizing the gut through movement. But it's funny that everything seems to start around the gut. You can definitely change these patterns and they become subconscious. It's just early days. Like any new practice, you just need to practice it and need to be a little bit committed to it. And it doesn't have to take long periods of time. But it's about actually learning and doing drills that change the way you move, so that it does become, over time you'll start to feel different. And once you feel what a movement should feel like, it feels good and your body likes that. It's just having to teach it to do that over and over again, so it becomes subconscious.
Joe, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I would love to know from a parent's perspective what sort of movement and exercise you would recommend them getting kids started on early. Like, what kind of things do you do with your boy to get him moving well?
So I've got a 4-year-old and an 11-month-old. So the 4-year-old, he's very, very rarely in shoes. Mm-hmm. And when he is in shoes, they are always barefoot shoes. So it'll be like a soft-soled leather bottom shoe, or just something really, really minimalist.
Any brand that you use for your kid that we can recommend that you like?
Yeah. So, and look, don't get too hung up on shoes. Like, I still try and tell parents, even though there are some better shoe options out there now, little feet still need lots of stimulation from different textures and surfaces. There's lots of different research coming out around like how it can help developing the brain as well. So, I'll tell you some shoes, but just don't think that they're like the be-all and end-all. You still need to get barefoot where possible. Mm-hmm. But yeah, look, some of the shoes that we use are Vivo Barefoot. So
yeah, I know Vivos.
Yeah, so Vivo do some kids' shoes. There's a brand on Instagram called PK Designs, I think it is. I'll send you the names of them. Okay. They sent me some samples recently, and they were actually really good. I was really impressed with their shoes. They're a really thin rubber sole. They move quite well, and they've got some pretty cool colours and designs. We've used a brand called Shoe Tweak Designs as well. They're like a moccasin. They're a little bit narrow in the toes for my liking, but the rest of the shoe is absolutely amazing. They're so thin, and they're just leather, so they feel a bit stiff. Feel a bit stiff when you first get them, but they break in so quick. And my little boy, he's been through a few of those pairs and smashes them. He loves them. And the one other thing that we will sometimes use are just rock shoes, so like wetsuit boots.
Oh yeah,
they're a fantastic option just to, if you're hiking through the bush or something. They're soft. Right. They can get wet. They do stink after a while, but they're really soft and give you a little bit of protection if you're hiking or something, or going over rocks down the beach. But really minimalist. But like I said, as barefoot as often as possible. And to answer your question, what exercises we do, I try not to do exercises as such with kids, even in the clinic. We try and make more games out of stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. More what kind of, do you take him bushwalking? Do you go, climbing over rocks?
So we live right near a beach, so we're always down the beach climbing over rocks and playing games in the sand. We do a lot of little crawling games, so kind of hard to explain over a podcast. We play a game called it's kind of like What's the Time, Mr. Wolf? But instead of sneaking up behind, we crawl like a Komodo. So we get really low, knees off the ground, and that's so ask how many steps you have to do, and if it's 4, then you do 4 little crawls really low. So it's really developing those hip patterns and pushing off through the big toe. And then the guy who's like the wolf, he's a bug sprayer, right? So you're crawling like a bug, and then if the bug sprayer says, it's spray time, he'll run after you, and if he taps you, you have to lay on your back for the next round like a dead bug. So you're activating all the core muscles and doing the opposite arm, opposite leg. So you start working on some motor control, like contralateral patterns. That's one little game we play to just get some movement patterns happening. But lots of crawling. A lot of kids just don't seem to crawl enough anymore. Parents want to pull them up too quick and stand them up. And once kids get the taste of standing, they don't want to go back on the ground.
Yeah.
So let your kids crawl as long as they can, because it's so good for contralateral patterns. So getting the arms and legs moving in opposite directions, which is what happens when we walk. But it develops so much strength through the hips and stability through the hips, as well as that drive off through the big toe. So as kids start crawling and pushing down through the big toe, it just activates so many good movement patterns. So, really encourage crawling.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Good.
Even for adults, I crawl. That's like part of my exercise regime is crawling patterns. Like, it is so hard to do if you do it properly.
I found a link. Oh no, I found a website that I'll have to see if I can find it to link to. But it had all different animal movement type games and exercises for kids, and it talked about how it really helps them with sensory processing disorder. And it would be the same sort of thing. It really helps them with their movement. And I'll have to see if I can find that link. It was really good exercises.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see that as well.
Yeah, I've posted it a couple of times in our support group for our gut health program.
Okay, cool. Paul, I just picked up on some keywords that you used while you were describing shoes. And I'd just like to run through like what I understand are the qualities of a good shoe, and maybe you can correct me or add to my understanding. So it seems like, from your perspective, the function of a shoe is to protect the foot really from any kind of sharp objects or something like that. And then it needs to have like a lot of space around the toes so they don't get squashed in. And it needs to be flexible so that the foot can actually move freely without being restricted by the actual shape and structure of the shoe itself. Is there anything else that I've missed out?
And the heel height, just making sure it's
yes, okay.
flat.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and then there's no which normally is tied in with heel height as well, but if you put a shoe flat on the ground, the toes should be flat as well. For a lot of traditional shoes, the toes will sort of roll up. There'll be like a rocker at the front.
Yeah.
That's not a good thing. That doesn't allow the big toe, sort of helps the big toe out by the toe doesn't have to bend quite as much because the front of the shoe will roll. So then you're not activating. There's lots of things that happen when the big toe bends. Just from an anatomy point of view. So it's pretty cool. It's all these built-in features that came standard with this model of human body, but we just don't tap into it when we have those little features in the shoes. So really, really flat shoes is a must.
I'll be using something really that I'd love to run past you. I found it personally very beneficial, but I don't use that for my children, but it's just because my big toe still hurts a little bit. And I came across this a few years ago something called Fluffy or Fluffy Wedge. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's this kind of little, really tiny silicone wedge that you put in the front of your shoe underneath the big toe. And for me, what it does is, because my toe just, as it lands to the ground, there's always this friction on the bone that just as I'm stepping forward, it causes this kind of inflammatory friction on the joint of the big toe. Just by having this little wedge under my big toe, it kind of puts it in the position as it comes down to the ground that when the pressure hits it, the joint's already in the right position, so the bones don't actually grate against each other. And
so it's sitting between the big toes, you mean?
No, it sits right under the big toe. Just right.
Okay,
and it's just this tiny wedge with that is sort of, it's like a doorstop really, but definitely not as extreme in its angle. Like it's really,
and just forcing it towards the middle of the foot, but towards the other foot.
No, it just pushes it up towards the sky. It kind of pushes it up. Yeah. I'll send you the link for it so you can tell me offline what you think, and I can mention it in the next podcast intro what you thought about it, so that because I'd love to have your opinion, because I found it super helpful for my hallux limitus. That's what my podiatrist called it. I know what you mean. So
my take on that is, like little things like that can be beneficial to get around some blockages, but my goal is always, can we actually work on your hallux limitus? Like, can we get some more mobility through that, and then train all the muscles around like that big toe joint to get stronger, so that you can use the big toe more functionally without having to use little like devices to assist.
I'd love to not to have to use it. So would joining your program online help me transition out of this?
Yeah, I think we should definitely have a chat, and I can show you some exercises that can be really good for stabilizing that big toe joint.
Awesome.
But just quickly, just for everyone else out there too, sometimes with the big toe, you need to look further upstream. So quite often I'll see a link between like a hallux limitus or hallux rigidus, which just means a stiff big toe, and a hip dysfunction. So if your hip's not working as well as it should, your big toe can lock up. So you kind of need to look at both ends.
Okay. Great. Maybe we can do a Skype session and you can have a...
Sounds like a good idea.
Yes. I'm scared.
I'm so glad I was raised in far north Queensland. We just ran around with no shoes, and we did heaps of bushwalking and rock climbing and clambering over riverbeds, and all of that stuff was just an everyday thing for us. And I just remember my sister gave me some shoes when I was in grade 5, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll wear them to school. But I always took them off as soon as it was exercise time in the morning, and I never put them on for the rest of the day.
So good. You're so lucky.
Yeah,
I'm so jealous.
My kids have grown up like that. I remember posting a photo on my Facebook page one day. We were moving house, and my kids were running up and down the street with no shoes, taking boxes from one house to another because we moved up the street. And I had people horrified that my kids were wearing no shoes, and I was like, this is normal, isn't it? Kids don't wear shoes, do they?
And just quickly, that's a really interesting point. Like, that's one thing that I find is a big blockage for some people.
Yeah,
it's social.
It's like you don't look after your kids properly if they don't have shoes on. And I
couldn't even tell you the amount of times I've had people at the park, because my little boy doesn't wear shoes. Like at the park, like if we go to the shops, he doesn't wear shoes. Like anywhere that he's not going to, contract a contagious disease, or he's not going to step on glass, he's pretty much barefoot. Yeah. And I've had people at the park say to me, where's your shoes? Or people at the shop say to him, where's your shoes, little boy? And he's like, what do you mean? Like, why do you have shoes on? I'm like,
that's a policy in stores, like in shopping centers, that you're not allowed in without shoes. Like it's to that level. We have barefoot phobia.
It's good that I live in a small country town because no one cares here.
Right. Well, like down here, like I'm in south of Sydney, and even preschool, we had to talk to the preschool and take on responsibility.
Right. So you can do that.
Because he goes to, they're supposed to wear shoes, but we said he's not, like, he doesn't wear shoes. Like, he doesn't need to. We don't,
not at preschool age. I mean, they're not working in a lab.
Well, that's right. There shouldn't be anything in here that's going to be dangerous. So that was an eye-opener too, that, it's just society standards that we are supposed to wear shoes.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it?
But shoes have had their place in the in history. That helped us get to places that are, too hot for our skin or too cold. So, I mean, they definitely have a function, but we also need to let our feet, enjoy some of their natural function as well.
You mentioned, we talked about footwear and food. I'd love to maybe talk about that last point, sitting, and the damage that does.
Yeah.
So sitting...
I'm doing all my good work now.
You're sitting. Yeah, look, and the thing with sitting, even as adults, some people I see will go into standing roles, whether it's retail or trades or whatever it is. But unfortunately, for the most part of our upbringing, we're in chairs, and that's school. We're sitting in chairs for long periods of time, and that starts to change that whole movement pattern thing I was talking about. So when we're sitting for long periods of time, our hip flexors, so the front of our hips, can start to become shortened, which can change the position of the pelvis. We also don't activate the glutes as well as we should when we're sitting. For most people, we don't activate them at all. Where, our ancestors would have been squatting or otherwise just sitting on the ground and getting back up off the ground. But they'd be going through these big sort of movement patterns where now we just sit at 90 degrees and that's it. We're constantly in the same position. So it's more that it shortens a few different like tendons around the hip. It can also, our ankles can become a little bit deactivated as well because they're just sitting on the ground. They're not having to do anything. They're just in the one position for long periods of time. But for me, it's more around the glute function. I think sitting too much just creates lots of hip instabilities, as well as breathing dysfunctions. So it's that whole sort of core and hip patterns that start to change because sitting for long periods of time, it gets harder, not impossible, but it's definitely harder to breathe with your diaphragm, to breathe deep into your ability to create support and control, because you just don't need to. You're sort of squished up in 90 degrees. We start to, sit like just, hang off our joints. And so that's kind of where I see chair's a big problem in that, we're just not having to support our bodies either. We just chill out and sort of get a bit lazy for long periods of time in these sort of devices. Slouching and sitting off, maybe one hip. For me, it's definitely the shoes. That's the big one I want to change the view of with the world. But, we can't forget that sitting for long periods of times will change our posture as well if we're not aware of how we're sitting. And then, the food stuff.
Awesome. I've got one last question about adult male shoes for work. If you've got any recommendations about something that looks professional for them that they can take into the workplace.
What about women's shoes that look nice?
There's definitely more options coming out that look normal. So, Vivo Barefoot, they do a pretty good job at the moment. Like, they have like leather school and sort of work looking shoes. There's a couple of brands, I can't remember their names. I could track them down and send them to you, but there are a couple of brands that do dress shoes, but the issue is they're quite expensive, like really expensive. I remember one pair I looked at was around $500 for a pair of minimalist dress shoes. So they are out there, but you kind of pay for them. So even if, depending on what you have to wear, like I said, Vivo Barefoot do some nice dressy looking adult shoes. But otherwise, worst case, if you have to wear your dressy shoes, like traditional shoes to, a meeting or to just
seminar for us.
Things like that, then so be it. But then it's like, where can you start to switch out those shoes? Like if you're just walking around the office, or you're, from the office to home, if you're catching the train, then it might be putting on some minimalist shoes and trying to tap back into that and connect to your feet again. But keep looking online because there's more and more brands coming out that are jumping onto the barefoot minimalist movement. But the really dressy sort of work looking shoes, there's still not a whole lot out there.
Still difficult to find,
I actually realized I've got one more thing I'd love to. I'll just say it and you tell me your thoughts, because it's one of those women's high-heeled shoes.
Oh, no, I knew he'd say that. No,
I'm about to hang up.
I just have one pair that I like. It's just a little high heels.
And look, it's the same thing, right? It's about...
hardly ever wear them anyway.
But if you're going to... I still like to preach to people that, barefoot is best. We need to be barefoot as much as possible, all the time, ideally. But I get it, right? We live in, whatever century we're in. I can't remember. We'll try and keep the podcast relevant, right? But yeah, like if you're going to go out and you want to wear some fancy shoes, then so be it. But it's being aware of what those shoes will do to you long term.
Yeah.
And then trying to manage it so that, yeah, if you're wearing them more often than you should, then you also then understand what you need to do to counterbalance that shoe. And, have that awareness of being in a flatter shoe as much as you can.
Well, the thing is, when you're wearing the flat shoes all the time and barefoot a lot, and you put on a pair of high heels, you can't wear them for very long, I find.
No.
It's really just for something fancy, and then you get them off as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you can, they're definitely
criminal, Joe. It's criminal.
Oh, I know, but I just love my red high heels. But I only wear them now and then for speaking, and they're like my power shoes.
Yes.
We'll get some nice red flat shoes for you.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Love it.
I have to go shopping again. Oh, shoe shopping.
That's good fun.
Yeah.
We always paint some.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
Heels on you, so you need to be barefoot.
Paint
Get some body paint on the.
You reckon that'll work in when they say you've got to have closed-in shoes for cooking? Do you reckon that'll work? Painted, they might not know that.
I reckon you get away with it. Maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not. Oh well. So what's going to have a go at me every time I wear them now?
That's right. Good. I'll hold him to that.
No, that's good. That was really helpful.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Paul, can you tell us a little bit about how people can find you?
Yeah, look, so I've got lots of little videos and tips and exercises on Instagram. If you want to sift through that, you're more than welcome to. It's the Barefoot Podiatrist.
Okay.
Is my Instagram handle. Otherwise, the barefootmovement.com.au is my website, and yeah, that's constantly changing. If there's any sort of workshops or talks coming up, you can find them on there, and we're kind of constantly evolving our sort of programs and the ways people can work with it. So that'll be on there as well. So the barefootmovement.com.au.
Great. I'm your 4,400th follower now on Instagram.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
It's exploded. Look at it go.
Watch out.
I know.
Awesome. Paul, thank you so much.
I'll have to get some social media help now just to manage that. Huge.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. This was really fantastic and a really good walkthrough. A topic that we haven't covered at all before, so it's going to be really, really helpful for our listeners. Thank you so much.
Well, that's right. If you have any more questions, feel free to yell out. I'm always happy to answer questions and help as many people as I can. So, yeah, don't hesitate to reach out if you need any more info.
Awesome.
No worries. Thank you.
That's all right. Thanks for having me.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives. Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.